1. So before I say anything, this is not a creepypasta or a fake story or anything like that. It's a real experience I had. But that's up for you to decide if you believe me, think I'm crazy or whatever. But this is not an attempt to make a creepypasta or scary story. I am no writer. I am a geography major in college. Perhaps an hallucination or creation of my mind at the time, but it felt real to me. Very real. I have never had any mental illness other than depression, anxiety, that are now medicated, but never anything more serious. At the time this happened, I hadn't done any drugs other than a few beers after the incident to relax and get to sleep. This was in 2017. I was turning 18 at the time. I'm 23, nearly 24 now. I haven't told anyone in my personal life because of 2 reasons. 1, they'd think I'm either A, crazy, or B, making it up. And I have a reputation for not being a liar or making things up. I hate being called a liar, and I've went out of my way in life to be as honest as I can. If not sometimes too honest, because I just hate being called a liar. Even if I am actually lying, in this case by neglecting to tell it, or when someone asks me if I've ever had any supernatural experiences, I just say no. But I have. I just don't want people to think I'm crazy or lying. But it's been years since this happened, and I just had to tell someone, so here I am. Also, for what it's worth, I'm not religious. I'd say I'm agnostic. I don't really believe in the supernatural, but I also don't say it's impossible, as I don't know everything. Far from it. This story doesn't help, but I don't believe in ghost stories for the most part, UFOs, etc. I'm very skeptical of that stuff and believe there are explanations that are far less exciting than people would like to believe. But this is something I've experienced that I can't explain, and still bothers me to this day when I think about it and when I have nightmares. So some backstory. My mother and little sister were going to visit my grandparents. They live near this little town called Eminence, Missouri. About 30 minutes south of the town deep in the mountains. It wasn't super remote. There were neighbors a few miles away and such, and they were the hillbilly types as you could imagine. It's steep in the Ozarks in Missouri, so yeah. Lots of missing teeth and meth and crazy old mountain folk. If you've been in the Missouri hills, you know what I mean. So, we were staying in a camper, about 200 or so foot from the grandparents' house. My mom, sister, and I. One day, a few hours before dark, I decided to get on the 4-wheeler and go into the woods. I toyed around in the woods and hills a bit, but I wanted to get deep in there on the 4-wheeler and have some fun. So I filled it up, asked my grandparents where the trail was. There was a trail that you could take to ride horses down, 4-wheelers, etc. And it was a one-way road with no turnoffs to get lost. So that's where they told me to go, and I drove off. I rode for about 40 minutes in one direction, until I was nearly half out of gas, and about this time I was searching for a place to turn around and head back. It was a small and narrow trail, so I had to wait until there was a small clearing to do a U-turn. Here is where things get weird. I remember as I was riding, the trees blowing in the wind, the bird songs, the animal noises, the woodpeckers, all the wonderful noises of nature I love so much, from the woods. Suddenly they all stopped. It was dead silent. I mean dead silent. I remember goosebumps going all over my body just from the lack of noise alone. Knowing there were animals all around, but everything just went silent. It felt like I was in a noise vacuum or something. Everything felt different, sounded different, or more accurately, sounded like nothing at all. The only noise was from the burr of the 4-wheeler. As I was riding down the mountain, I saw a huge deer or antlered deer-like animal, and I mean it was fucking massive, standing in the pathway I was driving on about, 50 foot in front of me or something. Not exactly sure, but close, but not too close. It wasn't there, then 1 second it was. It wasn't moving, just staring at me. It had dark, dark black eyes, like I was staring into nothingness. intense darkness, it stood out from the color of the forest very clearly. I still see this animal in my dreams staring at me. I have nightmares every now and then about this animal just staring at me. The antlers were nearly the size of its body itself. The antlers also looked like tree roots or something. I'm not too familiar with deer. I have never hunted or anything, but the antlers just didn't look like anything I've ever seen on a deer or any animal that has antlers. Too large and too spindly and windy. Something about it just looked terribly off, and I could feel my heart jump into my throat. And I stopped the four-wheeler instantly and just stared at it. I was terrified, but also couldn't help but stare back. While it stared at me, I remember the wind started blowing and rustling the trees, and it sounded like the trees were speaking to me in some strange language unknown. Or maybe I was just hearing things and scared out of my mind. I remember getting the feeling I was being told to leave and never return. That's all I could make out. But again, I never heard those words spoken. It was just a feeling. I can't explain it very well. I may not have understood the language, but it was clear. Like if you were in a country where you didn't speak their language, came up to their house door, and started hearing them yell at you to leave. You may not understand the language, but you know what they're telling you. That's how this felt. But in a language of wind, trees, nature. Jesus Christ, I sound fucking insane. So I did. I left. I hightailed it. I bolted. I beat it. I got moving and grooving. I turned the four-wheeler around, nearly toppling it off the trail and falling down some 15-foot drop near the trail. Since I hadn't found a good U-turn clearing yet, and wasn't about to keep driving towards the deer, or whatever it was. It was a tight U-turn, but I made it, and floored it as fast as the four-wheeler would go. It was still dead silent. I've never heard silence like that. My father is a sound engineer. He has a home studio, and a studio that has dead boxes, or whatever. You can sing and have no noise from the soundproofing. And that's the closest I can explain the silence being. It was that quiet in the goddamned woods, where it was alive with noise not too long ago. I floored the four-wheeler to go as fast as I could back up the mountain, around the bends, and get out of there as fast as I could, not worrying about the danger I was putting myself in driving so fast near some sketchy parts of the trail I was on. I got on a flat, straight path, and around this time I was about halfway back to the entrance of the trail, I would estimate, and I started to see animals, deer, birds. I saw a black bear too, the only one I've ever seen in my life, all sitting or standing near the trail. Not like right next to it, but about 15 to 20 feet back in the woods amongst the trees, just fucking staring at me. All these wild animals, including the birds in the trees, all silent, not moving, and just staring at me, only their heads moving, following me with their eyes. Well, I left as fast as I could, not making a sound, these animals, not even the wind, the birds that were up in the trees looking at me, all watching me silently. I'll never forget the feeling of their eyes burning in my back once I passed them all. It's the scariest feeling I've ever felt to this day, the eeriest feeling of my life. I kept going as fast as I could. The sun was getting close to setting, but it was still plenty light out, thankfully. About an hour from setting, I'd say, but I just kept going. I remember going past areas I hadn't recognized at all. It felt like I was on a new trail or had taken a wrong turn. But I knew that was impossible because this trail had no turnoffs. It was just a single road. A one-way or whatever. But the surroundings were 100% not the same as on my way back in. I started to freak out, reminded myself it wasn't possible since it was a one-way trail, and just kept going. I remember passing a huge tree that had moss all over it. This massive tree. Like something out of a fantasy movie. A tree I would have 100% noticed on the way in when I was originally coming into the trail, and now here it was. Terrain and trees with moss I have never seen or noticed before. I also didn't see my four-wheeler tracks that would have been there, but for some reason were blown over and no longer there. I can remember the fear that I was on the wrong trail somehow. But I knew, being a one-way, that was impossible. So I kept going. And I surely wasn't about to turn to see if I missed a turnoff somehow. Eventually I came to an area that suddenly looked normal, and I could see my tracks again from when I came in. Somehow there was a part of the trail that I had passed through that had changed scenery and removed my four-wheeler tracks. I have no idea how this is possible. I don't like to think about it. I kept seeing animals on occasion, just sitting back from the trail, staring at me from time to time. Shortly after getting back on the normal trail or whatever, I remember hearing the wind pick up and start to speak to me in that foreign language I mentioned earlier. I've never heard wind like this before, and I've been in the woods when it's windy a fair amount of times. It was otherworldly, if you will. I don't know. Thinking about it now terrifies me still. This time it sounded less ominous and more friendly. As if it was encouraging me to keep going, and I was doing the right thing by leaving, as if it was no longer angry at me for my intrusion. I eventually got to the entrance of the trail, which was a two-way. It was a Y-shaped trail, and the right side was the side I took. The left side was another trail that was also only a one-way, but in a different direction. And the trail of the Y was the way back home onto the highway. I remember as I pulled off onto the shoulder of the highway from the trail, everything went silent once again. That dead silence I was talking about was suddenly back. I turned back and saw the exact same deer or whatever it was standing there, but this time it was moving, stomping its foot and raising, lowering its head like a horse shaking off flies. The wind blew once again, and I felt like it said again, never made any understandable words, but never return, or something like that. Then it walked into the trees, and then out of sight. Then, once out of sight, a few seconds later, the birds began to sing. The normal noises of the forest returned, and everything returned to the expected normal of the woods. I just sat there staring back from where I had come into the woods, feeling relieved to be out, but also feeling like I had no idea what had just happened or how to even parse it out in my mind. I was shaking and barely able to keep my thumb on the gas trigger on the four-wheeler as I peeled out onto the shoulder of the highway to get back home. I just got back onto the highway and started to gun it about a mile or two up the road to my grandparents' driveway. On the way there, I passed a local on his gator, a type of four-wheeler with a trunk thing in the back, more for farm work than fun, and he waved at me. And maybe it was just me already being creeped out, but he had this look, like he knew what I had just seen, like he was in on it and kept going. I don't know. Probably just my imagination making a friendly stranger more than he was. I waved back and just kept going. All I know is I'll never be going back into the Ozarks, or any mountains for that matter, for as long as I live. People may think I'm lying, trying to make a story, went crazy temporarily or whatever, but I know what I saw. I have no idea what it meant or what it was about, but whatever it was, didn't want me there. Or wasn't where I should be. So I'll never return to the mountains again. Fuck that. I don't know what I saw. I don't know what happened. I'm open to the idea I had a hallucination, as that makes far more sense than what I saw being real, but I just don't feel that was what happened. But then again, how would I really know? It drives me insane trying to figure this out. I guess I never will. Chalk this up to another weird story of being out in the woods, people here. But I'll tell you one thing. I definitely take weird stories people say they've heard and seen in the woods a little more seriously. All I can say is, while this sounds insane, looking back on it, I never felt in danger. I never felt as if the animals wanted to hurt me, simply scare me off. As if I was somewhere I shouldn't be, and they were doing me a favor by leading me back home to civilization. As if I was just somewhere I shouldn't be, and they knew it and were doing me a favor. Even though the deer had dark, black eyes, it didn't feel menacing, just black. Even in my nightmares I have about this creature, it's never aggressive towards me. It almost feels protective of me. But it still scares the wits out of me, like a guardian angel shepherding me out of a place I have no place being. I have had several nightmares that have had nothing to do with the woods or this animal. Then I see the deer in my dream to lead me out. It's very bizarre, and I just don't know what is going on with all this. I'm curious if anyone listening to this has had similar experiences in the Ozarks, or mountains in general. I just had to get this out somewhere, at least where nobody knows who I am. So if I'm called a liar or schizophrenic or a creepy pasta maker, it's anonymous. So there's my story, whatever you think of it. I live a normal life, in college, doing well, with an apartment with a buddy. I have a girlfriend and a job. I'm very happy and enjoy life most of the time. I'm just an average guy like everyone else. But sometimes this pops up in my mind and I remember. Or I have a dream and it all comes back. An experience I will never forget, but I wish I could. That's all. Thanks for listening. If anyone has been in this area and had anything similar happen, please do tell. It would make me feel better to know I'm not the only one. I've Googled some and haven't found anything similar to this experience that I considered credible. I don't know. Two. My roommate and I are house hunting. We went to one that just kept calling to us. Every time we opened our apps, boom, it was right there in our faces. We both felt like something was a little bit off about it, but we finally caved and said, sure, we'll go tour it. We get to the house, walk around it, everything seems fine. Garage is boring, paint's peeling, boards outside are rotting, etc. So that was a turn-off for us. We started to go back toward the front of the house, and I noticed the back door was wide open. I thought that was odd, as literally anyone could just walk in and squat. I got a funny feeling like I was being watched as we walked past it going back to the front of the house. Well, we went inside anyway, just to see it, since we were there and our realtor put in the effort to get us a showing. Everything was fine. It was a cute little place, but that's just it. It was little. There was basically no living room, but enough about that. I'll get to the actual experience now. We walk through the place, and we get to the basement stairs. There's no door to them. Just in the back behind the kitchen there's a small hallway that has the door to the backyard, and at the other end an open doorway, and then the stairs down. I instantly felt my hair stand on the back of my neck, and I felt scared to even look down the stairs. My roommate looks at me, and I said, I feel it too. Maybe I had a look on my face or something, I don't know. We go down the stairs, and I said out loud, fuck's sake, please don't touch me, I'm just here to look. Our realtor looked a bit uncomfortable too. We get to the bottom of the stairs, and the oppressive feeling backs off, leaving in its place a feeling of still being watched, but by something that feels scared, almost like a scared child. We look in the bathroom, the 2 bedrooms, and once I got to the closet in the second room, the I'm feeling scared got stronger. Not like me being scared, but whatever was down there with us. I walked out of the room and straight across the living room down there. There was a very small area, about the size of a small closet, with half of an original concrete wall. I instantly felt an overwhelming dread and almost burst into tears. Then I felt the oppressive one come back full force. While it wasn't audible, it felt like it was screaming at me to get the hell out of its space. I ran out of the basement so fast. Once back upstairs, it was almost normal feeling. We went up to the loft and the attic, and it actually felt quite comfortable, until we turned to go back downstairs to the main floor. The lights were all off when we went up, so my roommate flipped the switch to turn them back off. They flickered, then all went off except the one above him. He flipped it back on, but nothing changed. Flipped the switch back down, no change. That one light stayed on. We went back to the main floor living room, the realtor asking what we thought. My roommate kept looking toward the basement. We finally went back outside and decided we weren't taking this house. Roommate and I got in the car and I asked him if he was okay. He said it followed us everywhere after the basement. Oh, and apparently I said, "Don't worry, I'll find it," when I walked out of the closet and to the concrete wall. Now, I've been having a nightmare nearly every night since we were in that house. I'm trapped in that corner. I'm screaming non-stop. It's dark and I am in so much pain. I think something terrible happened there. But why am I dreaming as if it's me experiencing it? Three. Some background. I am now nearly 30 and have always had an interest in the occult from a theoretical standpoint. I guess some may have referred to me as an armchair magician, if you will. I had some really strange dreams as a young child, before I taught myself not to dream. Though, as they're memories from a long time ago, I can't really call upon them with any accuracy, subject to both a child's frame of mind and time. So to continue, roughly 2 years ago I had a series of experiences that I can't be sure were real, but I could swear that they were. I can normally tell when a dream is a dream. Unlike most dreams, these ones have never faded. Maybe it's because I think upon them often, or maybe because they were real. The following experiences all occurred shortly after waking up. I've never had the opportunity to really talk about these experiences, as no one in my life is spiritual or religious and would dismiss them. I was home at my parents' house. It's a new build, so there's no old history there, and the houses were supposedly built upon an old stud farm, a horse farm. Experience 1. I was in my room, and it was late, around 11 p.m.-ish. I was getting ready for bed, and I began to feel uncomfortable. Nothing too bad, but I felt uneasy. I shrugged it off and went to bed. I woke and couldn't move. I felt frozen, and I could feel someone sat next to me on the bed. I thought, this is probably sleep paralysis, and decided to close my eyes and just relax my mind using a meditation technique and drift back to sleep. Experience 2, same room next night. I was up late again, and this time the uncomfortableness was worse. But this was my room, and I'd grown up here. I wasn't going to leave my room. That would be irrational and silly. I went to bed. This time I woke up, and I was on my side, and I felt pinned. Not frozen, but pinned like somebody had me by the back of my neck. This made me incredibly uncomfortable. I struggled to speak, but couldn't, and eventually, after struggling long enough, I could move. I whipped around to see what was there, and there was nothing. The room still felt unfriendly. I left my room around 3 in the morning and went to sleep on the sofa. I didn't manage to sleep until it was light outside. My mom asked me why I was there in the morning. I told her I felt really uncomfortable in my room for some reason, and she said, well, you have to go back in there and deal with it, and that was the last we spoke about it. I know she has experiences herself, but doesn't talk about them. Experience 3. Having spent the day reading through my occult books, I decided to get up off my armchair and attempt a working. I performed a self-cleansing and aura-strengthening and shielding rituals outside away from the house. I went back to my room later in the evening and waited for the sense of unease to creep back in. It was stronger this time. Maybe from my unease and fear from the previous nights, or maybe it was just my imagination. I could feel something watching me from behind as I sat in my chair at the computer desk. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, as I was expecting something to happen, so I ignored it, but the feeling got worse. I turned everything off so there was no noise, no electric hum, and told the thing in my room that I had been sensing that this was my space, and it was not welcome here, that it was to leave, and focused on projecting my energy around the room, claiming the space, making sure to illuminate the corners. I then went to sleep. I woke up around 3 again. This time, I was not frozen, but there was a pressure upon me, but I was able to move. Slowly, as if through treacle. I forced myself to move, and when I did, the sensation vanished. I looked over to the window, and I saw in the moonlight a shadowy, veiled feminine figure. Not exactly a kind or loving feeling, but they weren't giving off an oppressive feeling, and they didn't make me feel uneasy. In fact, they felt completely different to the previous feeling. They gave off a kind of quietly powerful and protective vibe. I watched her for a time until she turned to look at me, and I couldn't make out her face, but she smiled and then vanished. This was my first set of experiences that I was unable to convince myself were not just a dream. It all felt very real. Since the first experiences, I've had more, but until last week, I had no strange events occur in my old room, which is freaky, unnerving, but intriguing. 4. My family has Appalachian roots, and I spent a lot of time growing up in the mountains of West Virginia. A strong sense of and respect for the paranormal and one's ability to sense it was installed in me from a young age. I was always taught to listen to your instincts. When something feels wrong, it is, and when your gut tells you to get out of a situation, you do. As kids, we would go out playing in the woods. This was really common in my family, and we, the kids, just set off after breakfast, took a packed lunch, and were expected to be back by dinner. Supper, as they would say, time. We didn't take maps or anything, and the older kids taught the younger kids how to navigate, and somehow we always made it back home. At the beginning of the summer, and often before heading out for the day, my great-grandma would drill into us the rules. I can't think of a better way to say it. Rules included things like paying attention to animals that don't appear right, no whistling, never acknowledge your name being called, always counting your group to make sure you have not lost or gained one, and most importantly, if something feels wrong when you get out of the area. I can think of a few times during our daily adventures where one of great-grandma's rules came into play, but it just wasn't a big deal. It was always treated as one of those fact-of-life type of things. When we would get back and tell her what happened, she would explain what happened and give us pointers if we ran into something like that again. I guess it was more of a we coexist with these things and have to protect ourselves when we encounter one than a sense of fear. No different than running into a dangerous animal, and nothing bad ever came of any of these run-ins. Now for what happened in Louisville. One more point that I feel is important to the story. I am a 6'1", 250-pound man. Needless to say, generally people do not intimidate me or make me feel unsafe in any way. It was the summer of 2021. I believe it was around the middle of July when this took place. I was in Louisville on business, and if you're familiar with the area, I was a few blocks from the New Lou area, but not all the way to Bardstown. It was the middle of the day, and I had gone out to smoke in the parking lot. The parking lot was in no way isolated, as multiple busy roads come together and snake around the block. I'd been out there a few times and was on the phone with my mom, having a completely normal conversation, when suddenly, the strongest sense of dread I've ever felt in my life came over me. I looked up and there was a woman walking down the sidewalk on the opposite side of the street. Walking isn't really the right word any more than woman is. She wasn't really walking in the traditional sense. The best way I can describe it is that she was trying to make it look like she was walking, but the legs were too long. I don't mean that her legs were literally too long, but that is the best way I can describe it. Maybe like someone learning to walk on stilts. Her arms were wrong too, kind of like they would go from being too long to being too short. I also couldn't see her, kind of like she was blurry or not rendered all the way. It was not a hazy day, and it was not very hot for July. I don't know a better way to explain it, except that I couldn't seem to bring her into focus. When I say I was overcome by fear, that doesn't even really do it justice. I have never felt a fear like I felt that day, It was a fear that I didn't even know was possible to feel. Like I was in the presence of some ancient evil that would make an encounter with a not deer seem like a picnic. This might sound hyperbolic, but it is how I felt. I wasn't afraid for my mortal body, but for my soul. As soon as I noticed her, I was frozen in this fear. Part of my brain was screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move a muscle. I could hear my mom talking through my AirPods, but I have no idea what she was saying and couldn't process it. I stood there frozen as she was making her way towards me. I genuinely have no idea how long it was. It might have been 30 seconds or 10 minutes. But I think it was probably just a minute or two, and I was only focused on her. She continued her weird attempt to walk and stayed out of focus until she was almost directly across the street from me. I would say there was probably about 20 feet separating us, taking into account the 2-lane road and the sidewalks. When she was almost directly across the street from me, she came into focus. She was just a little old lady, maybe in late 70s or early 80s. Once I made that connection, my rational brain tried to tell me that I was being ridiculous, and it was just a little old lady. I have nothing to fear from a little old lady. Even if she was crazy and tried to attack me, I could pick her up and punt her across the street if I had to. But the instinctual part of my brain wasn't interested in hearing that. When she was directly across from me, she paused. She turned to look at me and was kind of jerky. When she did, her face was wrong. It wasn't like something out of a horror movie, and I can't tell you exactly what was wrong with it, but it was wrong. It was kind of like one of those magic eye pictures where you see the 3D image when you unfocus your eyes. She smiled at me and her mouth was too big. It was almost ear to ear. For some reason, that smile is what finally broke the paralysis that had me rooted in place, and I ran. I ran in the opposite direction and only stopped when the area was fully out of view. When I finally came to my senses, my mom was yelling into the phone asking if I was okay. She informed me that I just stopped talking for a little bit and then screamed, and she could hear my breathing. I don't remember screaming, but I must have. As I got a hold of myself, I told her what had happened, and she asked me not to go back to that area anytime soon. Not that you could have paid me enough to go back there right then anyway. I took an Uber to my hotel and started making arrangements to cut my trip short. The next day, I took an Uber back to my car and had the driver drop me off directly behind where I was parked. I got in my car, started it, and floored it to get away from there. I left Louisville in my rear mirror as quickly as I could. I've been back since then, but when I have to go to that area, I always go with a group, and I avoid it, if at all possible. I've been trying to rationalize this since then, and I just can't come up with a rational explanation. I don't do drugs, I don't drink alcohol, and I don't have any underlying psychological issues or a history of them in my family. I have never before and have not since had an experience like this one, and the only conclusion I can draw is that I ran into something paranormal, but I have no idea what it was. Hoping someone here might have an idea. I've done my best to be as unemotional and factual as I can here. I've tried to leave out the hyperbole and emotions, even though it is very difficult to discuss this without bringing emotions into it. Also, I will point out that the human memory is not perfect, but every little detail is burned into my mind. I dream about this experience frequently, and I can still see her in my mind's eye. 5. My siblings and I seem to have all had experiences with the same spirit. My sister and I have only caught a glimpse, but my brother has gotten a good look many times. The spirit has a stereotypical horror movie look. It appears as a pale woman, average height, thin, with long dark hair down to at least her waist. Her hair is dirty, oily down to the ends, so it almost looks wet. She wears a white dress or gown, also very dirty and yellowed. Her feet are dirty too. She seems to always appear barefoot. Her skin is sickly white and veiny. I only saw her once and got the impression that she was ill, like physically diseased. My brother is the only one of us who's seen her face. He says anytime he's seen her, she is looking right at him, usually standing over him when he's laying down or looming behind him, smiling excessively like she means to hurt him. He woke up to see her standing beside his bed most nights for a year or more. He said she made him too scared to move, that she was smiling but looked like she hated him. I think he said she whispered something to that effect to him before. He even saw her in the back seat of his car once and almost crashed. I've only seen her once in a dream. In the dream, I'm standing in the bedroom the three of us had to share in the small apartment we moved into right after our parents divorced. It's dark in the room, but I can see the lamp in the living room is on, so I walk to it. Standing in the living room, I see that the light is on in the kitchen. The kitchen had a bar over the countertop and a row of cabinets drilled into the ceiling, so they made a long, narrow window. The woman was suspended in the air, laying flat like on a bed. The first thing I saw was her oily hair dangling. Then I noticed the backs of her arms and hands, her dress hanging from her, the backs of her calves, and the dirty black heels of her feet. She was high enough off the ground that the upper cabinets blocked everything else. The dream had an uncomfortable feeling, like I had wandered in and was seeing something I wasn't supposed to. I remember being afraid of her and wanting to leave before she noticed me. Then I woke up, and that was it. My brother and I were swapping ghost stories a few years later, and I told him about it. He'd never mentioned his experiences with the woman to me before, and spilled it all after. I asked why he'd never brought it up, and he said seeing her made him feel crazy. He felt relieved when he heard I saw her too. We called my sister up, and asked if she'd ever seen anything in the many places we'd lived as kids, making a point not to share what we had talked about. She eventually told us she'd seen the dark silhouette of a woman with long hair in a light-colored dress one night, watching her from the hallway of the apartment in my dream, the divorce apartment. She and my brother were both awake for their experiences. My sister experienced sleep paralysis for the first time in the divorce apartment. She never saw anything when this happened, just felt something malevolent in the room with her. Her sleep paralysis continued on to my grandmother's apartment, who they moved in with after I got married and moved away. That's where, and around the time, my brother started to see her. She tormented him for a long time. I didn't have my dream until some years after she stopped, and he hasn't seen her since. I think about it a lot, and wonder sometimes about what she is, how long she followed us around, why she was so bold and aggressive with my brother but not my sister and I, and why she stopped. For my brother's sake, I'm glad that she did. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. If you enjoyed the video, please do poke the like button. And if you'd like to get the videos a little bit early, you can support me and the channel for as little or as much as you like a month through Patreon. You can also get yourself some nifty Hellfreezer merchandise, both of which are linked in the description. And you can also make one-off donations during streams or videos like this one. While this is not required, I do appreciate it. It helps feed my addiction to electricity. Alright, let's see. No other business today, I don't think, so let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. Today's question is, this one comes from my moderator Shigar, so let's click on the super secret moderator room in my Discord. Well, the first one's about farts, I think I'll skip that one. Okay, you have two options, which do you pick? You get the pet of your choice, and his lifeline is attached to yours, and is perfect in every way for you. Meaning, it's not going to die, it'll stay in perfect health for the rest of your life. That way neither of you has to experience the loss of the other. Or two, take all the income you earn in a month, and you'll now just get that deposited into your bank without having to work to earn that money, so whatever job you have is no longer required, freeing up all that time. You could use that time to keep doing the job and earn double the money, or literally do nothing at all. Which would you choose? I would personally choose the second one because money good. I'm also not someone who's owned pets, so I don't really have to make that decision. Please do let me know what you think in a comment below. And with that, I'm gonna head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.